All right, welcome everybody to the January 15th, 2025 regular council meeting. I want to thank everybody who is attending in our gallery and those watching online, and start by respectfully acknowledging the land in which we're gathering on as the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. I don't believe there's any late items. Just going to stand by for a second. Sorry, I won't be able to think and we just had a little bit of a technical challenge, blaming it on the computers, obviously. I think we got it solved. Excellent. So we'll continue on. I don't believe there's any late items, but we do have 2 minutes if somebody would like to move those. Excellent. Are there any errors or omissions in either? Seeing none, we'll accept those minutes as presented unanimously, and we'll move into the presentation with the resident survey. Your Courtney, your voice, and we'll pass it over to Mr. Carver.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council. This is our second year of reporting back and consulting with our residents directly. Council may recall that we discussed this, the topic of talking with our residents, and we had direction to do this on an annualized basis. And so I'm really happy to have this information here. Ms. O'Connell will kick off, and our consultants will assist us as well. And then we can walk through the staff report with you.
Thank you very much. So this evening, we're pleased to present the results of the 2024 resident survey. As our CAO advised, this is our second year, and really the reason or the rationale for doing a 5-year consecutive survey plan is really to establish a strong base mark data set. So in year 2, we are able to do some analysis year over year, but I'll get into a bit more about that in my portion of the presentation. But we're going to start off this evening with a presentation from Forum, who was our lead on actually holding the statistically valid survey. Lauren is the president of Forum Research, and we'll be going over both the methodology and the results. Then I will complete the presentation to speak to the operational analysis. So looking at what we heard last year, what types of operational changes or initiatives we implemented as a result of the feedback we heard from the public, any potential correlations between activities we undertook and changes in the survey outcomes, and then some new information as well as it's been revealed. So we'll start off by Lauren, who's joined us via Zoom, and I will pass it over to him.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me. Okay, good. So let's get started. So I'm presenting the 2024 results. Forum did the 2023 results last year. We're going to have a bit of comparison with last year, and we're going to discuss the results in some detail. If we can get started right now, we're going to look at the key findings. And there's 8 things we want to focus on in terms of today's presentation. First of all, the quality of life rating remains very high at 84%, although that is down a little bit from last year. So something that we want to think about when we look at the results today. Second thing is the initiatives that the residents are looking for in terms of improving the quality of life include 3 things. Addressing the homeless issue. Homelessness, you'll see, is a big topic today, and with 41% saying they'd like to see that addressed. Drug use and addiction at 17%, and more affordable housing at 15%. Are the 3 main things they're looking for the city to do that would improve the quality of life in the community. Third point there is 70% are indicating they get good value for their tax dollar. That's a high number, but it is down a little bit from last year when it was 78%. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a sec. Fourth item there is the Net Promoter Score or index remains stable. Now that is a measure of negative versus positive word of mouth. It was negative 16 last year, and it's pretty constant, negative 17 now, and we'll have a look at that also a little bit later. The reasons for not recommending the city is the homeless population, lack of affordable housing, and the high cost of living. The fifth thing there we want to talk about is the satisfaction in the overall services that the city provides. It's very high at 66%, and that's exactly unchanged from last year. The sixth point is we'll see in our gap analysis that looks at both things that we do well and things that we can improve upon, and versus things that are important and not important to the community. And the two things that are important to the community but don't get the highest scores in terms of satisfaction are land use and community planning and traffic management. And I'm sure council's aware that those are challenging areas for any municipality. Finally, we're going to look at city interaction staff. Large number of citizens have personally dealt with the city in the last year. 39% indicated that. They also indicate a fairly high level of satisfaction with that overall service at 66%. That is high, but a bit down from last year. And then finally, just some individual ratings on service satisfaction. Staff are courteous, very high at 91%. Knowledgeable, very high, 86%. And being treated fairly is also high, 82%. So let's get into the details. Let's go to the next slide. So very quickly, all I want to point out is two things. The telephone survey sample of 300, completely random, luck of the draw, whether you get picked to be in the survey. And the second thing is the field dates are November 4th to the 16th. And we're going to see the previous survey was done in the summer in July. And I think it might have had an impact on one of the scores. Let's go to the next slide. Just some comments on statistical analysis. I'm going to skip this page. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so let's look at the detailed findings and the detailed results. So what do we see? First of all, we start the survey with a top of mind question. So without raising any issues in the citizens' minds, we simply ask the residents, what's the most important issue facing the community? Totally open-ended, they can say whatever they want, and then we're going to group all the responses. Where 42% are going to indicate homelessness. Now, it was already high last year at 34%, and it's become even more prevalent in terms of top of mind. So you can see that there at 42%. The next issues, and they're kind of related to the homeless issue, lack of affordable housing, lack of available housing. One is down a little bit, one is up a little bit. It's kind of a draw again. Those are the next two most prevalent issues, as they were last year. Beyond the homeless issue, mental health and drug addiction are mentioned by another 5%, up a little bit from last year. And then after that, we have a host of other little items, community safety, traffic, taxes, and so forth. But you can really see where the citizens are thinking in terms of this question. It's really the homeless issue, cost of housing, and so forth. Okay, let's go on to the next question, which is the quality of life overall. How do they find the quality of life? They, in fact, find it very, very good, very high, 84%. Top two boxes, that means we're combining the very good and the good scores there. It is a little bit down from last year at 90%. We can't really tell with 2 years of data whether we have a trend here. We would need one more year of data to say that. But it hasn't gone up. That's clear. Although it does remain a very, very high number. But it is something we want to think about and look at going forward. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is a relative question. So instead of asking them about the quality of life being good or not good, we ask, is it better or worse than 3 years ago? So this is more of a perceptual question. They have to think back 3 years and consider things. And you can see a large number, even though the overall scores were high last year and again this year, becoming worse is the perception, even though they're not really giving that much worse ratings from year to year. But 68% of things are saying things are getting worse rather than getting better, and something for us to think about. Okay, let's look at items that they think would enhance the quality of life. So again, open-ended, simply ask them what initiatives or programs would you like to see that would enhance the quality of life in the community. And here it is, number one, again, is the homelessness issue, providing assistance, shelters, and so forth. Second thing they're looking for in terms of providing a better quality of life in the community is addressing the drug use issue and addiction in terms of treatments, rehabilitation facilities, programs, and so forth. It was high last year and is even higher now at 17%. The third item is affordable housing, more housing. It is a little related to the homelessness issue. It's down a little bit, but still number 3 in the ranking at 15%, 20% last year. So you can see what people are thinking. Fourth on the list is community safety. It was at 8% last year, now at 9%. But those are the main items that people are thinking would improve the quality of life in the community. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about value for tax dollars. And if they've seen the value for tax dollars has been high, both last year at 78% and now at 70%, but there is an erosion in that rating. And you can see that red bar getting bigger. 13% said poor, and now it's 22%. So a quarter are starting to question the value for their tax dollars compared to 1 in 10 approximately last year. This is something I think for everyone to think about. And I think it also is partly reflection of the general affordability crisis of facing people these days, inflation, the decline in standard of living and so forth in the country. You can also starting to see it here in a question like this on value for the tax dollar. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we asked this question. This question really balances how they feel about increasing taxes to maintain or enhance services. That's the dark green on the right there. Versus maintaining taxes. That's the mid green in the middle. Even if it means cutting services, and then we've got cutting services to reduce taxes. Is the very light green there. And you can see that there's less interest in increasing taxes. It was 29%, and now it's 22%. Again, hints to me that the affordability issue is affecting people these days, and it's affecting them how they're going to answer this question too. So not as many are looking to increase services through increased taxes. More are looking to maintain the status quo. And more are looking to cut services to reduce taxes. So something to think about in terms of how they feel about the taxation levels and balancing that against the service needs. Okay, let's go next to the Net Promoter Score, NPS Net Promoter Score. What we do is we group people into 3 general categories. The first group are promoters, people who say, yeah, it's a great community to live in, would highly recommend it. And this is, in fact, a 10-point scale, and these people are giving a rating of 9 or 10 out of that 10-point scale. Then we have a group of people who are kind of in the middle. We're not saying it's a terrible place to live, but they're just so-so in terms of how they recommend it. That's the group in gray, and they're giving scores from 7 and 8. And then we've got the detractors. So they're giving a score of between 1 and 6 on this scale. And you can see the distribution of scores this year versus last year. It is really almost identical, especially when you think, it's just a sample of 300, and that's again a different sample of 300 this year. When you look at it, there's not much change. There is a slight difference. So in terms of calculating the score, we subtract the we take the promoters and we subtract the detractors from that. We look at the difference. You can see that there's more detractors than promoters, so we get a negative number. So think of it this way: if you were at a cocktail party and you bumped into 100 people from the community and you said, "Hey, how do you like living here? Would you recommend it?" Out of those 100, you're going to come across 22 people who say, "Yeah, it's great living here." And you're going to come across 39 people who are detractors, and that's how you get a net negative number of 17. It may look a little shocking getting a negative number like this, and we had that last year also, but it is pretty common in the municipal world to get numbers like this. And I would say these are fairly typical, and we have examples of other communities in BC with numbers not worse than this, I could say. Okay, we can talk about this a little bit later. All right, let's move on. So those people in red were then asked, hey, why did you give that score? Number one, they're going to say, well, what about the homeless population, dealing with that? Or they're going to say, what about the lack of affordable housing? Or what about the high cost of living here? So you can see how this all ties in. What the issues are, what we already looked at, how that then affects the rating they give in terms of the net promoter and the reasons for not recommending. Okay, let's switch gears here and look at the services provided by the city. Get a very high score here, 66% now and 66% last year, and virtually identical in most components. So no real change here in terms of perceived satisfaction with the services provided. And now what we want to drill down is look at the details of each of the service elements that the city provides. And we have that on the next slide coming up. Okay, so here are the bunch of things that the city does. We've put them in order of how high their score was. In terms of the top two boxes, that's the very satisfied and the somewhat satisfied. Fire services, they were number one last year and they're number one again this year, 93% and now 96%. Numbers have actually gone up a little bit. And in fact, if you look at the comparison, and we can go down this list, waste management, it's up. The parks, no change. Recreation services down a little bit. And then everything else is pretty much up or no change from last year. Now, the one thing I was looking at and thinking about was the recreation services. And I think asking that question in November rather than in July when we did the survey last time may have affected their score. So I wouldn't even panic over that one finding. I think it's just an artifact of the time of year that we did the survey. I might be wrong about that, and there might be something specific going on in rec services, but that's my likely explanation for that. Otherwise, the data is great. Of course, you're going to get the lower scores in the more challenging services that the city offers. Traffic management, it was last time, and it's gained last. Of course, it's a frustrating thing for the citizens, the residents. So, of course, it gets a lower score. I'm sure you all know the challenges of land use and community planning and how feelings evolve in terms of that. So those are the findings. They're very, very high. They were high last year, and they're even higher for the most part this year. Okay, let's take that information that we just looked at in terms of what services, how happy people are with the different services. We're going to plot this in our grid. We're going to plot those very numbers that you just looked at, those satisfaction numbers. We're going to plot them against the axis on the left there, the vertical axis that goes from low to high satisfaction. So, I showed you that fire services was number one at 98%. And you can see why it's near the top of that, the high bar of the satisfaction, because it's close to 100 there. And the other axis, though, is how important these services are to people. So what we're looking at is 4 groups of services. In the upper right is what we really care about, because it's services where we do really well, and it's something that's really important to people. So the rec services, the parks and green spaces, the garbage and recycling, all very, very important to people. And the city does a great job of that. All good there. We call that an area for maintenance. The main primary area for improvement are things that are important to people, and that's the land use and community planning and traffic management. And there we don't score so high. So we want to improve those scores because they're not super high and they're something people really care about. Then we have the two secondary areas. These are areas that are not most important for people. You can see them listed there. And you can also see how the city is scoring on those services. So there's a bunch of services, the waste and water, the water and waste management, the online services, fire services. We're doing a great job, but their people are not, it's not totally important to people. So we want to maintain that because we're doing good job with those services. And then finally, we've got a secondary for improvement. So those are things that are less important to people, but we're not doing that great job with them. So those are in that box. Now on the next slide, I've plotted last year's and this year's where we were at to see what changes there were. And very often you'll find that the services remain in the same box. So for example, primaries for maintenance, we had the garbage and recycling last year, and it's still there in that box, doing a great job, and something that's important to people. New this year is having parks in that box and having recreation services in that box. They weren't in that box last year. In the improvement, primary areas for improvement box in the lower right there, not a lot has changed. So traffic management was in that box last year and is still in that box. So again, something that's important to people and we could be doing better on it. And the same thing with land use and community planning, again, very important. And but we have our challenges in terms of satisfaction with that. And then you can see the others, there's some moving around of the things. So for example, we did well with parks and green spaces and rec services last year in terms of delivering that service, but it was less important to people last year. It's now rated more important in terms of this year's survey. Finally, to wrap up, let's look at the services provided by the city staff per se. So here are the satisfaction ratings, 66%, down a little bit from last year at 76%. And a lot of that down part has come from the very satisfied rather than the somewhat satisfied. So something for us to think about. This question is only asked to people who had that interaction with the city staff. So it's a smaller sample size. It's prone to more sampling error because of that, and something we want to look at in terms of our trending over time. But it is a decrease there. And finally, let's look at the actual services provided by the staff. So this is our last slide. So this is just satisfaction with staff services among people who had an interaction with staff. And remember, a large part of the population didn't have an interaction, so they're not giving a rating here. These numbers are for the most part up a little bit. So staff were courteous. The last thing you want is rude staff. 85% last year saying they're courteous. It's actually higher now at 91%. Knowledgeable, continue to be knowledgeable. You have a question for City Hall. Yeah, they're going to answer your question to your satisfaction. Looks like 86% of the time there. A little bit down is being treated fairly. It was 87 last year. Now it's down 82%. Could be margin of error, could be sampling fluctuation, hard to tell without another year's worth of data, but it's something we would flag at this point. And for sure, we would say, well, it hasn't gone up. Maybe it didn't go down, it was just a sampling bump, but it hasn't gone up in all likelihood. Finding the right staff to deal with, kind of no change there, up marginally. Service was provided in a timely manner. down a little bit, and maybe that's driving the change in the overall number that we looked at the previous slide. It was 72, now it's down to 68%, a little bit of a decline there. Staff went the extra mile, no real change there. It's within the sampling variation for sure at 58%. Okay, that is my last slide. So happy to take people's questions.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks very much, Lauren. Really appreciate it. It was a great presentation. But I believe we're going to pass it over to Ms. O'Connell, and then we'll take questions after that.
Thanks very much. So as Lauren presented on the methodology as well as the kind of the straight numbers, I'm going to try and put them into context with what we've been undertaking over the course of the last year and what we have planned coming up and what may be responsible, or at least an attempt to create a correlation between cause and effect. So starting off, basically, I just wanted to review why running surveys like this are so important. And really, it's to increase our understanding of residents' perspectives. So this is allows us to assess their satisfaction levels and watching those for trends and changes over time, looking both internally and externally through comparisons, whether it's year over year or through comparing like municipalities. We can start developing benchmarks, so seeing how we compare to our peers. And that's really good when we're considering things that may actually be a provincial issue as opposed to one that's more localized. By going out and doing statistically valid surveys, we are building trust through transparency and engagement. We're not hiding the trends or the changes in numbers year over year, but really making the commitment to continue to ask the questions, deal with the truths, and then try to do better over time. And then really using an evidence-based approach. So looking at the input from the residents in order to make informed government decisions. So this really contextualizes things. So you may be familiar with sometimes a small group can be very, very loud, and sometimes a large group's voice can get missed in those scenarios. With a statistically valid survey, it's really looking at kind of providing some more context on a citywide basis on some of these very important issues. And then really the information helps us to develop initiatives, services, recommend policy changes that are intended to meet or exceed resident service expectations. And then lastly, you're going to engage and we're also going to report out. So if we ask folks for their perspectives and opinions, we want to make sure that we're sharing what we learned back out with the community as part of completing that engagement cycle. Slide. So evidence-based decision-making. So this slide really highlights the importance of our commitment to evidence-based decision-making. Using data to guide our actions allows us to optimize resources, improve service quality, and prioritize effective initiatives. This approach minimizes bias, enhances accountability, fosters community engagement, and ensures responsiveness to evolving community needs and resident expectations. You definitely heard Lauren talk about shifts or changes that are happening across the board, so that's part of it. A key benefit of our 5-year commitment to the annual survey will be our ability to conduct more robust trend analysis. 5 years of data will allow us to identify not just short-term fluctuations, but also seasonal changes, cyclical patterns, long-term shifts, and this is just something that a 2-year data set can't strongly support. This deeper understanding really is invaluable in our strategic planning processes. A longer time frame increases our chances of capturing rare events as well and being able to identify outliers. So if you think about those cities that were running surveys during the pandemic, those could be considered outlier years, and therefore changes during that time period could be appropriately contextualized. These unusual occurrences, while infrequent, can have very significant impacts, and better understanding the outliers can help us to prepare. Slide. So we definitely heard themes around quality of life, top of mind issues, most important services for the city to consider developing or providing. And really what this slide is speaking to is around a declining quality of life, especially from the indicators here in Courtenay, are significantly tied to our complex social issues. And why it's important to consider quality of life, it's really because a our decline in quality of life can negatively impact our community across the board. So economically, socially, and individually. For example, lower consumer spending hurts businesses, weaker social connections lead to isolation, and increased stress impacts resident well-being. Addressing these underlying issues would be critical for enhancing quality of life for Courtney in the future. The city is actively working to improve quality of life by tackling some of the key challenges that have been identified, being homelessness, substance use, and affordable housing. And these initiatives include, just as examples, improving services for unhoused residents, leading the development of a regional winter shelter strategy, partnering with BC Housing on affordable housing projects, including a new shelter, advocating for increased support services and incentivizing affordable housing development, and securing agreements with developers to include below market rental. So the city is definitely taking action from a policy perspective to address as best we can the issues that our residents are really saying are the most important and the most critical. Slide. Lauren spoke a bit to value for tax dollars, and we are above the mean, which is great. So although at 70% above the mean, we are still down 8 points from 2023. So while many residents still find relative value compared to other municipalities, there's a clear increasing interest in more information on financial matters. And this comes up in a later slide when I talk about communication and engagement trends, emphasizing the need for the city to enhance communication and engagement to meet residents' concerns and expectations, specifically around how financial decisions are made, and wanting to be more aware of government spending during these times. Slide. So Lauren did go over the gap analysis and talked kind of at a high level about some of the shifts we've seen from the different quadrants. It's interesting to note that online services were deemed in 2023 to be extremely important in an area for significant improvement. This is where we saw the biggest shift. So now it's in a maintenance category. So we went from 65% satisfaction to 81. And this is actually one where I think we can do a bit of attribution. So based on the survey results from last year, we did a big push in various departments to create and look at more opportunities to provide online services. So converting a lot of our former, print and write and scan kind of old school processes into fillable forms that are a bit more automated, as well as online payment models. So examples of this include the accessibility feedback form, the delegation request form, as well as the bylaw complaint submission form, and then there's many others as well. In recreation, we did experience a decrease in satisfaction from 87 to 82. I know Lauren has said there may be some seasonality to it. It's also because we also believe that it could be because we are now seeing a return to the pre-pandemic levels of participation. So folks may have gotten a bit more comfortable with things being a little less busy, and now that everyone is back to pre-pandemic, that is a bit of a shift. But again, with 2 years worth of data, it's too soon to call it a trend. Slide. Under satisfaction, we do have some discrepancies. So while overall resident satisfaction remained unchanged from 2023, satisfaction with staff interactions in particular decreased. This is noteworthy given that the majority of individual service indicators in the staff area increased year over year. So we're doing better. You can see through the green on the table, those are areas where we've improved. The red is where we have decreased, and then the non-colored black is the things have stayed the same. So we have some contradictory or conflicting signals here where overall we're seeing improvements in the majority of our areas, and yet we're seeing a decline in general satisfaction. So this is one of those areas we're going to need to do add some additional questions to the 25 survey to try and figure out what that is. Very similar to what we did with the Net Promoter Score. In 2023, we didn't have the question as to why people were giving us a negative score. So we added that question in 24. So in 25, we'll be adding some more questions regarding satisfaction because of these discrepancies. Slides. Around community communication and engagement. So as you're all aware, the city's been undertaking a lot of work to develop the communication strategy, as well as currently about to complete the development of the engagement strategy. When we are doing these surveys, we also have the opportunity to create a benchmark of before these strategies are implemented, this was the perception of the public. And then when we implement those strategies, we can hopefully track the impact of the changes in the service adjustments over time. So in this slide, we're looking at, we've got the sense of belonging showed improvements to 75% agreeing that they have a strong sense of belonging, which is up from 70% from last year. However, when you look at the demographic information, higher income and educated residents are the ones who reported a stronger sense of belonging, highlighting a disparity requiring further investigation. So throughout the development of the communication and engagement strategies, we prioritized equitable engagement as some groups reported lower quality of life, specifically individuals with disabilities. And our strategy really is focusing on inclusive participation. Additionally, families expressed a need for more information about city services, highlighting an opportunity to improve our communication strategies and better reach families. So we can actually put our communication strategy to work to look at enhancing access to information for that specific group. Our current communication and engagement metrics provide a crucial baseline. We will closely monitor changes in satisfaction following the implementation of the new strategies. These improvements, directly informed by survey results, will be reflected in the features and functionalities of our new city website, which is also currently under development. The website will act as a central hub for enhanced communication and more accessible engagement, offering clear information on city services, easier participation in civic processes, and user-friendly access for all residents, regardless of income or education level. By combining these strategies with the new website, we aim for a more connected and inclusive Courtney, and this data-driven approach will yield tangible results, hopefully, in future resident satisfaction surveys. Slide. You know how on commercials, sometimes you have that legal disclaimer at the end where they say it really fast. This is that slide. We have some caveats based on some of the context in which the survey is undertaken, as well as some next steps for what I'm looking at making adjustments for next year. So really, this slide is reflecting some of the limitations on the current analysis and outlines the future steps. So first, we only have 2 years of data. So this limits our ability to establish strong long-term trends and definitively determine causation. So we can make a presumption that because we made an investment, for example, of time and capacity to create online, to increase the availability of online services, that ideally that is directly correlated to the increased satisfaction level. So that is what we've done. If we have an investment with a correlating increase in satisfaction, we're pinpointing that. At the same time, 2 years is still limited. Second, the infrequency of the comparable municipal surveys. So we are doing external benchmarking with similar size municipalities or whoever is close enough to us to be able to do that. However, whereas we're undertaking the surveys on a yearly basis right now, and we'll go to every other year after the 5-year benchmark is created, we have no control over how frequently other cities are undertaking this work. So although we may be using 2024 data, we may be comparing ourselves to 2022 data from others, and so on. Once Courtney has the 5 years, we will put more focus on our own internal benchmarks and movements internally because of the security of the data. Statistically valid approach of our survey can sometimes overshadow the rich insights gained from targeted engagement with specific community groups and equity deserving individuals. These targeted efforts often offer more nuanced understanding of their lived experience. So if you're putting the survey results or the perspectives that are represented within the survey into context, for example, if we have this survey that has questions that may seem like they apply to a specific scenario or decision of council or policy, and then we have a more intentional engagement that is happening on something specific, the intentional engagement really should be weighted at a higher level. This really is intended to be broad, general, non-specific, whereas targeted engagement has more fulsome, meaningful results coming out of it. So just how you're going to use the data in the future, just to put that into context. We also need to refine the survey itself. So some questions may not be providing the level of specificity we need. So the survey might not adequately capture the weight residents place on different services. This is particularly important because we've seen the instances of contradictory indicators. So high satisfaction in certain areas, along with the general decline in overall satisfaction. This might stem from a lack of clarity on jurisdictional responsibilities, and residents' understanding of which level of government is responsible for various services. So for example, delineating between services that the regional district provides, that the province provides, or the federal government provides. So moving into 2025's resident survey, which would be the third year, I'm looking to expand on the service and staff satisfaction questioning to understand some of these contradictions, as well as adding some questions regarding jurisdictional responsibilities. And as always, I do come to council with a report with the opportunity for some variable questions coming out of the various departments, depending on the types of work and strategies and initiatives they're undertaking. So that will come before council before the next survey is finalized. And just ending things with a quote, we've got meaningful engagement and data collection empower us to develop services that anticipate and address the evolving needs of our community while ensuring responsible stewardship of public resources. And with that, I'll open it to questions. Lauren can answer questions on the first half and I can answer them on the second half.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ms. O'Connell and Lauren. Thanks for the great data that we have before us. I'm glad you addressed the jurisdictional thing. I may have some questions later, depending on the ones that are asked by the rest of council. But again, thanks to staff for really pushing forward with this the last couple of years so we can start to build that over the next few years. Really appreciate it. And with that, I'll pass it over to Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the presentation. Yeah, nothing in here too mind-blowing. I don't know about other people. It doesn't surprise me much to see these sorts of numbers. A lot of people are satisfied. A lot of people think things have become a little worse. What really interests me is this British Columbia Municipality C, which seems to be amazing. I'm wondering if you can tell us where that is and what their community is like. It's one of the comparators that, right?
Yeah,
Lauren
what
has a
slide is that
Lauren
on? If
question.
anybody's looking at the slide.
Well, it's on our agenda. It's page 6. It's a reference in 66 and 75, kind of near the end.
Page 13.
Yeah, page 13 of the report.
So what do you, sorry, Councillor, what are you asking about that?
Oh,
about
which
that?
community is that
Oh, you wanna know which one
municipality?
it is? I'll ask Caitlin if we can. Caitlin, can we identify that or not?
Currently that report isn't public, like it's not posted on a public website, so therefore we're not allowed to share the exact location, but as the surveys go on, if these residents decide to post their information online, we can share which resident it is.
Fair enough. Yeah, I just noticed that their residents seem happier than ever, and they're just curious what they're up to. But without knowing that, I guess we continue on with what we're doing. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch. And with that, I'll move on to Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thanks very much, Mayor. And thanks. So there's a lot of interesting data. And funnily enough, I actually had that exact slide on my screen, the one that Councillor Frisch was referring to. So I wanted to ask a question about that. There are only 2 slides which give comparisons, and one compares us with 2 unnamed communities, and the other one compares us with 4. But there's also an average bar, which seems to indicate that there were more numbers at some point in the system. Then I would sure find it helpful to have a larger and more clearly defined group of comparators. I think it's helpful. We're all trying to solve similar problems around the province, and to get a sense of how we're doing, how we're benchmarked against other communities. I feel that I would gain more from this if I had a greater sense of context, because we're only in year 2, we can't draw patterns or trends. And here it's difficult to even compare ourselves to comparably placed communities with similar resources. So I'm hoping for 2025 that's possible, just to have a larger set of comparators, and where possible to identify them in some, it could be like a Southern Okanagan community, and that could be like, even if you're not going to go and name something. But is there, I guess I'm leading to a question here, which is there more data than just these 4 communities that you would be able to provide even for this year in terms of comparison?
So let us look into that issue. You know, every community is different. It really is, right? And so the issue of the comparators is there's not as many comparators as you would like, right? In terms of size and location and what the built form is like and so forth. So let us take that back and think about the issue of the comparators.
I can speak to that a little bit as well. So Forum runs statistically valid surveys, and statistically valid surveys are based on the exact same question being asked the exact same way. So when it comes to doing comparators, although if there's any limitations in Forum increasing the number of municipalities that we're looking at, it may be something that I can look at, because we also, in addition to Forum, there's Ipsos Reid and all sorts of other types of survey companies that are also doing municipal surveys. So whereas Forum may not want to take questions that seem similar, that aren't exactly the same, and you can't use those as a statistically valid comparator, I may be able to do that work within my portion of the analysis and say, you know, in similar trend question areas that ran by different types of survey companies, you know, these are the results. So I can definitely look at doing that for next year. I don't know if I can try and find the time this year, but I'd have to go and see who else is doing
And
it. But
I think I understand the limitations, particularly of the, you know, the validity of the questions being similar enough. I guess the 2 thoughts I had, one is that the average, which appears on the 2 graphs where there are comparators, indicates more than just those couple of communities. Just the numbers wouldn't make sense if it was just those. So it would seem that there maybe are more comparators. And the other thing, and Lauren, not knowing where you're based, but it would be helpful to have some island-based comparators, particularly because we face different costs and constraints than other communities do. So even if it's not the same size, like it's useful to have comparators that are sort of have the same geographical situation. Anyway, I'll leave it there, but thanks very much.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. I'm just getting used to my new location here. I don't have my setup all
Me too,
figured out
actually.
yet. So the top of mind issues, the top, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4 of those are traditionally not within our mandate, although we've been addressing those issues. So homelessness, mental health, addiction, et cetera. So the top of mind issues don't get to sort of our jurisdiction until number 5, public safety and traffic, number 6. Those top of mind issues seem to coincide with the initiatives and programs that people want, generally speaking, the things that people are asking for. And I guess I'm wondering how we reconcile that with the fact that people only want to maintain or reduce taxes. Because, you know, they want us to go out of our jurisdiction, basically, and they want programs associated with those things, but they don't want to pay for it. So I'm just curious, how we figure that out. Thanks.
thank you very much. And I think I can look at our Director of Finance who's back there and say this is probably not something that's new to them either. So we often have expectations to increase or improve services with the same time cutting taxation rates and things like that. Really where this gets into is moving into a type of survey design that is more about a willingness to pay. So it's about trade-offs. So where you have surveys that are asking questions around the importance of something, one thing in particular, without contextualizing it with, you may have to make a decision between A and B, but both things in someone's mind are an A. As soon as you start putting a financial cost to it and saying someone has to make a choice, then this result changes. So we had the Balancing Act introduced last year as part of the engagement for the budget review and budget process. This is the second year we're going into this, and coming out of the survey results where we really see, although it's divided into 3 categories in the actual results, that folks are wanting more information on finance, budget, and taxes. So that's definitely an area we're gonna have to look into more as to how we can leverage the balancing act, how we can look at our engagement on the budget in order to start asking some of those willingness to pay, because you can't have everything for less, unfortunately, especially when we have contractual obligations, inflation, and things that are beyond our control. So yes, unfortunately, unless we're in a more willingness to pay model in surveying, we're likely going to continue to see that type of result.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Morin. And I don't see lights right now, so I'll maybe jump in. And if anybody else comes up with a question or comment, that'll be great. One of the things I was going to mention on, and this is more potentially a bit of a just getting clarity on what's slide 10 in our e-scribe here. It's the balancing taxation and service delivery slide. And just one is just around the color choices, because there's some green and some gray. And because some of it almost, given the other slides, I'm not sure if maybe using red or another color in there just to make it a little easier to delineate the different things. That was basically, it's sort of a housekeeping thing I would expect. But I think, one of the big things that jumps out with this, when we see over and over again that the number one issue that's been articulated through this survey is frankly homelessness, which as I really appreciate that in this year we'll try to delineate, or at least try to extract some more information around the actual jurisdiction, whether that's at the city level, the regional district level, provincial level, and federal level. So really excited to see how that comes out next year. And then maybe to that point, it may be useful for us to actually push this out and give this to our MLA and our MP, given the fact that this is information that might help them as well. So and that has generated some questions. So apparently I talked for just the right amount of time, but those were, I think, the two things that I wanted to mention for now, and I'll pass it over to Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. And thanks for the presentation. And I really appreciate the staff report that really highlights some of the areas in which we're already quite aligned with the concerns that we've heard clearly in the resident survey from community members. Councillor Morin highlighted them, so I won't spend too much time on that. But I did have a question as it pertains to the statistical validity of the survey on the slide around demographics. It appears that the majority of the folks, or the largest demographic of folks that were surveyed, were above 65 years old, and the majority of folks surveyed also don't have children. And so I'm thinking about the ever-changing Courtenay that is our beautiful community, and wondering how Forum research kind of compares what we know from, I guess, the last census data from 2021 with the demographics that we see here in this year's survey.
So let me just comment on that, if I could. So we take the census data and we use that for our weighting. So the results were weighted by gender and by age to reflect the composition of the community. So if there was an overrepresentation of people 65 and over, that would be corrected through the weighting. So we would get an accurate representation of the whole community.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur. And Councillor Morin.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. My other question was just around the qualitative piece. We don't have any qualitative in here, and it's so difficult because the question around would you recommend, it could, you often see people saying don't come here because they can't find an apartment to rent and they don't want anybody else to come here to compete with. I mean, frankly, we hear that a lot. We hear, don't let anybody else come here, stop building places. So we don't really know the reasons why people are answering the way they are. So I'm wondering how we can get more of that qualitative data. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. With that one in particular, we specifically added a question this year to ask those negative net promoters why. Because I had presumed the same thing the first year we ran the survey in 2023. Is this an indicator of the we're full type of mentality? And really the follow-up question that was asked this year of the net negative promoters was, why did you give us a bad recommendation? And it was those top three issues. So it came back resounding: homelessness, unaffordability, housing. So we do have a very clear understanding as to why. It's not because we're full, unfortunately, but that is attributable for sure. And then as far as any of the other areas where we go, it would be really nice to have a better understanding as to why the perception is that way. That's where we're continuing to add explanations or more specific questions. So for 25, that's why I'll be asking more follow-up questions regarding city staff interactions and areas of service more explicitly, because we're getting two things that are saying very different things. You're doing really well in a whole bunch of other areas, and yet we're really not, we're less happy this year than we were last year. So some things don't make sense, so we'll add and continue to grow the survey over time.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Moran and Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm just wondering with the demographic question, whether it might be possible to ask for the inclusion of, say, just a postal code so that we could figure out where the people we're talking to are in the city. There are many other qualities of this, the crowd, the group that we've surveyed, that we've tracked. And I think, I know it could be helpful in terms of identifying hotspots or areas of the community which have a particular concern arising, and just help us zero in on that. So if that, I think your postal code is probably anonymizing enough, or maybe leave out the last digit, or like 5 out of the 6 characters, or
Postal code is
Anyway.
absolutely an anonymizing thing.
Excellent,
That
okay.
I do not believe that would be a problem.
okay, great.
Mr. Garbutt has a comment as well.
Yeah, thank you. Through the Mayor and Council, and thanks for the question. There are thoughts related to that specific topic of postal codes. And so I think appreciate the comment, and staff will look into that, and we'll consult with our advisors on that. There has been on Vancouver Island much discussion around engagement with people about just that question of inclusion. So I appreciate that ask. As a person who did this a long time as a planner, I think it's very useful. There are some thoughts about that, because that is there is some quite reasonable identification, and then there's some discussions around postal codes through social media and various things. So just appreciate that, and we'll note that. And if there is some reason or some thoughts, we'll talk to council about that in the future.
Thanks, and thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton. And again, I think one thing that the survey certainly has highlighted is, the number one issue, heads and shoulders across above everything else, is homelessness. And I just want to really applaud this council who is really focused on that. We met with not just the Minister of Housing several times over the past couple of years, but also Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. Last year, I was sent to Ottawa by this council and was able to meet with the Minister of Housing as well as the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. I believe Councillor Cole Hamilton also last year in his FCM capacity also advocated at the federal level. And so when we talk about these things that are happening locally, lots is happening in the advocation, because these are often, especially that one, is very much a federal and provincial thing. But really want to applaud the work that's being done at the RD. Obviously, we're going through the AAP process right now, but the vision to make sure that we are resourcing ourselves locally to be able to have the largest amount of impact, when I think we've really been able to show over the last 10 years that by resourcing our housing crisis and our homelessness crisis, we're able to do a lot here. So yeah, just kudos all around in terms of what we're doing, but also acknowledging that it is a wicked problem that is unbelievably difficult and challenging. So just want to thank everybody who shows up every day to work on that. Not just the elected people, but the people on the front lines and our staff who are doing a great job. So anyways, with that, I don't think I normally do a preamble or a post-amble that often, but just really recognize the importance of this and thank staff and Lauren and Caitlin for all your work today. And I think with that, we have a recommendation. All right, all those in favor? And motion passes. Excellent. Thanks very much. So Lauren and Caitlin, you can stay on and watch if you'd like, but you're also free to go. We'll move on to staff reports. We have the Youth Climate Corps pilot program. And we have Ms. Tezioli, I believe, is going to come up to the podium. And Mr. Garvin.
Thanks. As staff approach the podium, this report is in response to council direction, and Stazioli will give an overview, and we'll take council direction per the options in the staff report.
All right, and we'll get that podium.
All right, good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'm happy to talk to you about the Youth Climate Corps. And joining me online is Ben Simoni, the Executive Director for Youth Climate Corps BC, and he'll be available to answer any program questions after a quick presentation. All right, so the background on this is council directed staff to explore and report back on the possibility of the city working with the Youth Climate Corps, including potential funding sources and projects related to climate action to engage the public in promoting climate change mitigation and resilience. So the Youth Climate Corps provides paid work to young people aged 18 to 30 to complete climate action projects in their community. Climate action projects are defined as those that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help the community adapt to a changing climate. It's designed for crews of 4 to 6 young people to work together to develop skills and gain experience that may inspire future career choices. Some examples of the programs run in the last year by the Youth Climate Corps across BC are summarized on this slide. So there are programs run for the City of Vancouver, Kamloops, District of Squamish, and North Vancouver Island. And each of the bullet points represent different activities and projects that the teams completed. So in the City of Vancouver, they did the Climate Friendly Homes program, where they offered residents energy audits to find opportunities to increase the energy efficiency of their homes while becoming aware of the rebates available from the province and federal government. Hub Cycling, they did some learn to ride programs with elementary schools to get people feeling safe and comfortable on their bikes. Did some planting exercises with Ducks Unlimited, and partnered with an electric car company. So each of the programs are different in each of the communities. These are just examples of the wide-ranging work that the Climate Corps can complete on the ground and the wide-ranging skills that the youth would be exposed to as part of a program. So the program administration structure that's proposed for the City of Courtenay, it's a pilot program where we would hire 4 youth for 4 months this upcoming summer. It would work by the Youth Climate Corps hiring a regional coordinator to hire the pilot, to lead the pilot program. That coordinator would work with city staff and partner organizations to define the projects. And so the time period for that regional coordinator is longer than for the staff. It's about an 8-month term for the regional coordinator, whereas it's a 4-month term for each of the youth crew members. Once the program scope is defined, the youth crew are hired, trained, and begin work. And after the pilot, the impact of the program will be evaluated. Lessons learned will inform future decisions about the project. So the proposed local projects, they're not defined yet, but we will ensure that they align with the official community plan and provincial regulations, including the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030, as well as the provincial adaptation and mitigation strategy. The projects will be identified by the regional coordinator in collaboration with staff and community organizations. So it's proposed that their work plan will be comprised of both city-led projects and community-led projects. Potential city projects include a climate-friendly homes program, public outreach regarding flood management, air quality, rainwater management, perhaps ecological restoration, community gardens, fire smart mitigation. And then a process will be established to identify community projects that may be interested in support from the Youth Climate Corps and are aligned with the objectives of the program. So the financial implications, the total cost for a pilot program for this year is $136,500. It's proposed that it be provided by a couple of different funding sources. $65,000 would be provided by the city, and that fund would come from the provincial local government climate action funding. So that is provincial grant money that would not impact taxation. And then $71,500 would be provided by the Youth Climate Corps organization themselves from provincial funding and the Canada Summer Jobs Wage Subsidy that they have access to. So the options that we present to council tonight is that council directs staff to collaborate with Youth Climate Corps to establish a pilot program in 2025 to support climate action in the community and empower youth. So with that, I'll invite council to ask any questions they may have, either for myself about the structure of the program or for Ben, the Executive Director of Youth Climate Corps.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ms. Tazioli, for a great presentation. And I will pass it over to Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, and thanks for kind of highlighting the big pieces from the staff report. LG CAP, can you jog my memory around what other projects we have already committed to in our financial plan for, let's say, the next 2 years? I know that this is just for 2025, but I guess I do have some concerns around the impact of, $65,000 might not seem like a lot, but it's we have a limited amount in that pool of funding. So I just want to be reminded what we had planned originally for the LG CAP.
Yeah, sure thing. So LG CAP is currently funding our corporate facility management program, as well as a zero emission fleet vehicle transition plan, the home energy navigator program, and the upcoming update to the corporate climate action plan. But with that in mind, we've been able to leverage some grant funding. And so there's a much more LG CAP funds that remain available to fund this program and perhaps other initiatives depending on the amount of grant funding we get.
Just as a follow-up, Mayor, if that's okay. So just to confirm then, with the proposed amount from staff, there isn't going to be a budgetary impact on the existing projects we've committed to?
No impacts.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor Jolicoeur and Councillor Moore.
Great, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, this sounds really exciting, and always love youth energy on these projects. We do have some student ambassadors during the summer around water conservation, and we've had, usually at the public events in the summer, we have some of our young, I think there's probably summer grant students or whatever who are doing some education, and a lot of it is around climate action. I'm just wondering if there's any potential for the Youth Climate Corps staff to do any collaboration with some of those other programs.
And Mr. Garbett has a comment.
Thank you through the mayor to Councillor Warren. Thanks for the question. We have a shared workforce whereby these would be students, and then we have QP work. So we have to be cognizant of the work that everyone does. And so, yes, it would be complementary, but we have QP roles, and then these are new student roles. Or sorry, Youth Climate Corps roles.
Okay, so yeah, so they're not technically they're not the same as a summer student then, in terms of employment status or whatever.
Yeah, they are a different function, and we anticipate their work to be different just because we have a defined scope for the existing student ambassadors. So imagine that they would be doing different work, but because we still need to define the projects, we can consider opportunities for collaboration where it makes sense.
Yeah, I just thought if there's only four or five, you know, it's nice for them to feel like they're part of a bit larger team as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Councillor Moore. And there's a small little technical thing. If 4 microphones go on, somebody gets bumped off, and it won't let me change it. So next meeting will be all good. But for tonight, if you get bumped off, I'll get you back on if that happens. So and I'll move over to Councillor Hilling.
Thanks, Mayor. I really appreciate staff doing the work to bring this council initiative to fruition. I think in particular, we wanted to take advantage of this program to give young people the opportunity to be involved in leadership in our community and to counter some of the anxiety that we know that young people are experiencing around the climate crisis. But I wanted, since Ben has taken the time to be with us tonight, I wanted to perhaps give him the opportunity just to say a quick word about the experience with this program in other communities and how it's going in general.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Yeah, we've worked in approximately 10 communities. We've completed recently 10,000 working days of climate action, paid climate actions, where we pay young people living wage. That's about one person's working life. So over about 5 years. So we're really excited about the momentum that's grown with this program and the excitement that we've received. We recently received a $3 million grant from the province, which we over 3 years, which we'd be leveraging to support this program if it was passed by council. So it's, as I said, we have a lot of momentum. We really do like working with local governments, specifically because there's such a strong networker within the community. They have a strong staff and council have a strong understanding of what the community needs are. And you know, we've worked with District of Squamish. We're going to be working with the City of Vernon for the first time next year. And each year that we're able to develop these programs, we're able to learn from the past programs and make it so that we can see greater impact on the ground for the community, have less capacity put on the staff so that we're able to run these programs with minimal capacity put on staff. And importantly, as you mentioned, a big part of this work is the impact on young people. Climate anxiety is certainly a real thing. There was a recent Vancouver Coastal Health report that stated that half of grade 11s that they had surveyed had experienced eco-anxiety in the past 2 weeks, which is quite striking. And one of the things that we've seen as an outcome of Youth Climate Corps programs is that young people feel like they have much more control of their community, they're able to commit more to their community. And one thing that health data really shows is that to combat climate anxiety, you really need to give people a tangible pathway to action. It's really easy to, you know, scroll through Instagram and see you know, the climate destruction that's frankly happening around the world. But if young people are given pathways to action, and not just pathways to action, but also pathways to meaningful careers, that is something that's a huge co-benefit of this program as well.
Excellent, thanks. And next we have Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I kind of just wanted to highlight how great it is to leverage the money we have with the money you have and all those benefits you mentioned. Would you be willing to entertain the motion?
Yeah, I think we're at that
Excellent.
point.
Thanks very much. I'd like to move the recommendation.
All right. Thanks, Councillor Frisch. And yeah, these types of things are absolutely amazing. I've seen some of the stuff that's been done locally. I know when I was in school, I got to be part of this with the local First Nations, working on some really cool projects and learning that technical stuff and how things actually work. But you hit the nail on the head, that action to know that you can do stuff, because things are done, frankly, by people that do them. So I really like this in all its forms. So with that, all those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Excellent. Next we, thanks online there. Really appreciate your input tonight. Moving on to Clean BC Organics Funding Program. And I'll pass it over to Mr. Thompson. And the mic's already on, so you're good.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Through the mayor to council. Don't Don't have a presentation, so I've just got a few speaking points today. The province has recently relaunched the Clean BC Organics Funding Program, which is an application-based grant that could provide funding for up to 66% of eligible costs for the development of a new organics collection program. In Courtney's case, this could be a grant for up to $1 million for the purchase of organics carts. Those are beloved carts that we've been using for a year now. The last grant offering was in 2021, which the city did not apply for. It was in the midst of a financial review and of the solid waste service, and the outcome of the review wasn't quite done. It wasn't realized until the end of that year. Typically, applicants would apply for this grant ahead of the transition to automated collection. But given that the city has not received funding and has seen exceptional outcomes from the transition to automated service, staff are steadfast in applying for this grant. The application will highlight significant reduction in garbage going to the landfill and diversion to the organics composting facility. So some numbers have just been finalized for 2024, and those include a 40% reduction in garbage going to the landfill from 2023. Thank you. This equates to a reduction of 1,300 tons of garbage. If a garbage truck can take 10 tons at a time, that's 130 trucks off the road going to the landfill. We've also seen a 54% increase in organics diversion. So a big pat on the back to the residents of Courtney. They understood the assignment. They got an A. This is great.
Absolutely.
So we've achieved, through our curbside program, an organic waste disposal rate of 100 kilograms per person per year, which is below the current provincial target of 350 kilograms per person a year. That's 100 kilograms right now. And the 2022 average was 479 kilograms. So we're way below. That's our curbside program. It doesn't include the entire community, but we're well ahead. It's also an annual reduction of 22 tons of CO2 due to the transition to an EV fleet, and likely fewer reductions due to the fewer trips to the landfill and also diverting garbage away from the landfill and going through organics. So we're potentially reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 44 tons of CO2 from the curbside service with the conversion of an EV fleet and a diversion to garbage. I think that's the whole spirit of this granting program. So we're really eager to apply for it. So tonight I'll be seeking to move the recommendation that based on the January 15th, 2025 staff report entitled Clean BC Organics Funding Grant Program, the council directs staff to submit an application to the City of Courtney curbside organics carts through the February 2025 intake of the Clean BC Organics Funding Program, and that council support and commit its 1/3 share of the eligible project cost of 1.5 million, including any ineligible costs and overages of this project from which the 2023-24 launch of this program. The source of this 1/3 share would be through fees collected. So we've already collected those fees. There's no upcoming costs. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks very much for the presentation. I don't know if there's any questions. I know our council has already talked to our new MLA about advocating, and I reached out to the former minister who has passed it on to the new minister to really try to make sure we have lots of pressure to make this successful. And I'll pass it over to Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks to staff for bringing this forward. Yeah, I guess this kind of falls into the category of, it doesn't hurt to ask, even if we aren't super hopeful about the answer. It also looks like this funding opportunity doesn't seem to come up that often, which is a little bit, well, more than a little bit unfortunate for just how the timing worked for the City of Courtney in this case. One question I had, just, the intent of the program is to expand organics, and we do have a pretty significant portion of our residents that are not part of our collection system, being these multifamily stratas. And at the solid waste service level, they have been working with a couple of stratas for piloting ways to kind of introduce stream collection. And I mean, there's a lot of challenges because every strata has a different system and access and whatnot. But I'm wondering if any thought has been given to whether or not there's an opportunity for the city to support some of that with, because if we're able to access grant funding even to support stratas to like create those separate collection bins, it is a, you know, it's a cost barrier when a strata is looking at, you know, changing the way they do waste. And I'm just wondering if we considered that at all, because once we kind of took that out of what we're doing as a city service, we haven't really had a lot of analysis into what we're missing. And like you highlighted in the report, the waste reduction numbers are really impressive once you bring in that third stream of collection. So just wondering if there's another opportunity there. And I realize it's kind of really at the last minute in terms of this particular application, but who knows when it'll come up again.
There's that microphone turning itself off again.
Sure. That's a great question. In a conversation I had with a provincial staff member, they did indicate that if we were to pursue this grant as a growth in the system into multifamily, we would be, you know, more than likely successful. However, that would represent a very small component compared to the $1 million potentially. But I think to answer your question directly, it would be about expanding to other areas of the service and other areas of the community. Right now, we're just getting numbers back from the regional district. We had a conversation with our contractor today just about contamination levels. So we really want to understand with our regional partners where we stand in terms of how was 2024? How was the rollout of automated in Courtenay? How does it look in terms of organics contamination? And from there, we could definitely look at piloting service delivery in other aspects of the community.
And thanks very much. And Mr. Garbutt.
Yeah, thank you. Through the mayor to council. So what you've shared, Councilor McCollum, is news to us that there would be conversations about accessibility for those other streams, because we have been limited to that by virtue of the program itself. And so we'll follow up with the solid waste staff to inquire about that, because our staff have been fielding those questions for quite some time, including institutional areas like our schools, et cetera, and our own facility. So if there are, you know, the need to do pilots that need that very clear streaming, because the contamination issue is very significant, we'll follow up. So that's great. The other benefit of our organics program is that the garbage from our city that makes it to the landfill face is also cheaper in the grand scheme of things, because it doesn't contribute to methane, which is the worst greenhouse gas at the tip face. So, you know, these are, the more that we can do, the better it is, and the more we can divert. And if that does get wider in the community, I think it would be wonderful. So thanks for that information, and staff will follow up to get information.
Thanks, Mr. Garbutt. I believe there was a comment that Councillor Zolliker made off mic, so it might not have been picked up, but the idea that you made that comment about, you know, the citizens of Courtenay getting A+ for their efforts, and Councillor Zolliker made a comment that maybe we can do a Facebook post or something, basically accentuating that and celebrating the people of Courtenay for doing a great job. So, because sometimes they don't get celebrated for taking their garbage out to the street, but the fact that, you know, if they're getting the job done and doing it well, to let them know that would be great. Councillor Frisch.
I'd just be happy to move the recommendation.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. Seeing no further questions or comments, all those in favor? And motion passes. All right, next we have the sports field allocation policy project update. I'll pass it over to Ms. Saunders.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just here to provide you an update on the sports field allocation policy project. So as Council will recall, the Regional District completed the sports field strategy in 2023, which assessed the current state of fields, identified priorities for capital investment, and identified opportunities as to how to optimize sport field delivery in the Comox Valley. A key recommendation was to develop a new approach to sport field booking and allocation, specifically developed around standards of play, and to create a more streamlined and cohesive system with a specific recommendation to shift bookings to a single entity. So in late 2023, council approved that the city take the lead role in the region to develop this policy and hopefully act as the centralized booking function. Since that time, staff have collaborated with the staff in our partner municipalities and the CVRD, and each respective local government has received support or has resolved their support for the city of Courtenay to take this leadership role and pursue this central function. And then staff as from local governments as well as the school district have since been working through drafting a scope of work that met all the partners' needs. So the briefing note outlines that we've engaged a qualified consultant, RC Strategies, to develop the sport field allocation policy, booking process, and address fees and charges, as well as develop an implementation plan. The project is starting now this month and will proceed over the course of 2025. And the goal is that the policy and associated recommendations will be complete by early 2026. If adopted, this timeline should provide enough time for implementation to begin for the 2026 fall season. There is a significant transition time that will be needed for sports field user groups to ensure that any changes that come from this work can be implemented in time for their registration and planning timeline. So in our experience, that's at least sort of 2 seasons in advance. And even that we'll have to work with the groups to make sure that works for them. The engagement for this project will be focused specifically on engaging with field sport user groups. Public engagement was completed as a part of the sports field strategy. So staff and consultants will be looking to establish a project advisory committee, which will be made up of a representation of local sports field user groups who will be involved throughout the project to help develop the policy, provide feedback and input. And then all sports groups will have the ability to provide feedback through an online survey, as well as a number of discussion sessions. Staff are very excited about launching this important work. I can share that at a provincial recreation conference I was at last week, the topic of sport field allocation is a very hot topic across the province, and a number of municipalities are embarking on this work. There's I think only 1 or 2 municipalities in the province that have actually adopted a policy around standards of play, but are still in the process of implementing it. And then a number of other cities are just starting that work. So we do have a interprovincial group that's also working together to share our experiences as we go through this. And we're looking forward to the work proceeding this year. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Pleased to see this going ahead. 2 questions. Is it really that complicated that it will take a year and 4 months to draft the various reports as per the timeline on page 3? That's my first question. The second question, will it really only cost $35,000? Usually consultants don't get out of bed for that amount.
Okay.
Through the mayor to Councillor Hillian, yes and yes. So to answer your first question, there's a couple of complicating factors. The 2 most complicating factors are, one, that we're doing this in an interjurisdictional way. So the amount of time it will take to coordinate amongst Courtenay, Comox, Cumberland, the regional district, and the school district, and all of their elected officials adds substantial time. And is the right thing to do if the goal is that we have a consistent and standardized approach to allocation, which is what the sports field groups told us through the sports strategy, is that they want one policy, so it is clear. Although I'm sure they would prefer no fees, they want the same fees, whatever they are, across the board, and then also one centralized booking group. Getting to approval or agreement on the policy amongst all local governments and ST 71 will take substantial work. And then also implementing it in a centralized way will take substantial work. The second piece is that because we're looking to shift across the board away from historical booking towards basing allocation on standards of play as set by national and provincial sport organizations. While I don't expect, significant disruptions in actual volume of allocation, it is a different process, and the change management that will require of staff working together with sports groups is significant, and that's where it could all sort of fail to if we don't bring sports groups along and they're not bought into and in agreement with this approach and process. What we will see is then sort of sports groups sort of breaking off and advocating outside of the process, and that will make it very difficult to implement. One of the reasons from a budget perspective we can do this work for the 35,000 is because of the CVRD sports field strategy that was already done. All the inventory on field, a lot of the analysis is already done. So we need to update that, but because it was just recently done, it's very light touch. So most of the work is actually spent on working with the sports groups. Also, RC Strategies led the development of sports field allocation for the city of Abbotsford, who is one of the only ones who has a standards of play policy. They haven't implemented it yet. They're in that process. And they are the one consulting company working with other local governments on the same approach. So there is an ability to sort of take advantage of that work already being done.
Fantastic. Thanks for articulating that. Much appreciated. And Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Susie, for this. I just wanted to ask a quick question. There's the standard we're going to use is the Canada Sport for Life's long-term development model. And I have to say, like, I'm not familiar with that model. Can you just give us sort of a 2 to 3 minute explanation of how that's constructed? And because it seems that it'll help us align with, sort of a more accurate sense of use and equity.
Thanks for putting your mic back on.
Through the Mayor, Councillor Cole Hamilton. So the Canada Sport for Life long-term athlete development model, and I couldn't tell you exactly when it started. It would have been leading up to the Olympics, and it's built on sort of 2 streams. One is around athletic excellence and really working on Canada producing athletes at a very high level and being able to compete internationally, and at the same time understanding that and wanting to build athletic skill and ability in all children and youth that then lead all of us to be able to be active for life in any sport pursuit at any point in our life. So they built this program to say everyone should be able to access a foundational level of sport that is enjoyable and fun and gives everyone the fundamental skills to participate in any sport at any point in their life. And then as we sort of grow, some of us may, if we're lucky or interested, become, very skilled, talented athletes. And then the rest of us want to continue to be active for life in sport. Some of us may. And so through that work, all national sport organizations were then required to adapt their sport model to the long-term athlete development model, which then required them to look at basically their practice and game structure for, say, children and youth and teenagers and adults, and how they actually set that so that national sport organizations set guidelines and limits for sport groups at the provincial and local level to adhere to those standards, to make sure, for instance, that a baseball club or soccer club isn't practicing their 5 and 6-year-old kids 5 times a week. They're only allowed 30 minutes of practice and a 30-minute game, or an hour, whatever it is, and that's the maximum. Because one of the parts of long-term athlete development is also to prevent sports clubs from trying to make all children into elite athletes, which actually then decreases the likelihood that people will stay in sport because it becomes unenjoyable. So in terms of the allocation policy, each national sport organization has set standards for age groups and levels of play that set the number of practices and the number of games and the number of hours of play that they are allowed on the field. And each provincial organization has to abide by that, and every local organization, if they're a part of the PSO or NSO, have to abide by that. So we would then allocate their hours based on their enrollment numbers, and say if you have 100 kids at this age, you get this many hours. When you get into these elite numbers, we would then allocate your hours based on that. So then our allocation is based on what the national sport organizations are saying are the best practices to ensure both opportunity for elite athletic development, but also for community sport.
Thank you. That sounds like a really comprehensive body of information to be able to be tapping into and building on top of. So really appreciate the explanation. Thanks, Susie.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor McCullough.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the report, Susie. Yeah, just a question on the proposed project schedule. I see, the plan is to do user group engagement in March, and then there is a workshop around findings, and then well, it looks like there's 2 workshops that kind of come in April and June, it looks like. And my question was, are the workshops to re-engage with the user groups, or is the workshops local government? Like who is involved in the follow-up workshops before that draft comes out?
Great. Through the Mayor to Councillor McCollum. So the user group engagement in March will be the broad user group engagement. So that will be the online survey as well as discussion groups. And I believe there's 4 or 5, there'll be 4 or 5 opportunities for any sports user group to become involved. Quite quickly, so I think in February, realistically, we'll be looking to establish a project advisory committee that will hopefully, and we'll have to work with the sports groups on this, but be made up of representatives of sports, not representatives of clubs. That would be the vision, so that baseball, soccer, field hockey, lacrosse, cricket are at the table representing their sport. And that group would then stay intact for the life of the project, and we would bring them back together. I believe the intention is 4 or 5 times. And so as we draft materials, we would be bringing those back to that project advisory committee in workshops to hear feedback and input, and really invest time with that group to make sure there's understanding and buy-in, and also understanding the implications of the decisions. There is some choice still in here, and staff will have to navigate it a bit as we go through about at what point we come back to councils. Because this is an interjurisdictional process, we have to sort of sequence the decisions of councils without going too far ahead. So it is a possible outcome that everyone agrees to the same policy, but doesn't agree to Courtney being the central booking agent. It's possible that Comox or the regional district or Cumberland say we agree with the policy, even we agree with the fees, but we would like to book our fields ourselves. So we are still trying to work through a little bit of that sequencing and figuring out when the right time to come back to councils were, to make sure that we don't get too far ahead, only to find out that a council only wants to commit to a certain portion of the policy work. But the intention for sure is to bring that advisory table of sport user groups along on the journey and meet and have that consultative process at least 4 times at key points, and that is done before we present to council. So we would have their feedback, and then we would update the draft, and then that draft would come to council. So what would come to council would already include the feedback from that advisory committee.
All right, that makes good sense. And yeah, it seems like there's a lot of moving pieces. And I guess that's why the draft regional fee structure, there's like a few different pieces of work that show that they'll all happen simultaneously, but that might not actually be how it flows. That's just kind of going to happen in that block in the chart.
Correct. Yeah, I think we'll be further along on some pieces of work, and we'll have to determine what decisions we need from the respective local governments to be able to proceed with the next piece of work, to make sure that we're, and really the big piece is around the centralized booking and the implementation plan, because we don't want to go too far along that piece of work if at the end of the day our counterparts say, you know what, the policy is great, but we actually want to implement it ourselves, which would still be an excellent outcome. It wouldn't get us all the way to the field sports strategy, but it would get us very close. So.
Yeah, that sounds really positive. Just one follow-up question on some of the info you just provided. In terms of the user group having representatives from the sport, but not necessarily from the organization, what is the, because it seems the easiest approach would be from the organization, so there must be a reason why you made that clarification.
Thank you, through the Mayor to Councillor McCollum. And it may turn out differently, and that's okay. We know that the regional district has a group of sport group user groups together now, providing feedback on the artificial turf and its design. And so our hope is to build off of that. In my past experience, we had a similar ongoing group. It wasn't project specific. And while the clubs absolutely participated in that, the actual group was, folks would be representing the sport itself to try and shift away from those sort of commitments and natural biases that happen when we're representing a particular organization and their particular interest. So if we're really looking at this from a sport development perspective, we want to look at it from soccer as a whole. We may have an adult soccer representative and a youth soccer representative, but not looking at it from, you know, United Soccer versus, let's say, another soccer club comes up, because we actually need to look at soccer as a whole. So the vision is that we're looking at it from a sport development perspective, and that requires folks to come to the table with the knowledge and expertise they have in that particular sport, but hopefully being able to step away a little bit from their particular club interests, which of course are tied to specific fields, specific facilities, specific needs. Because to get to this kind of policy, everyone will have to step a little bit away from that, those, you know, very particular needs that they have, and be able to speak at a bit of a broader level and think about all the trade-offs that are going to be required between all the different sports and amongst their own clubs to get to a better outcome where we can have more kids, youth, and adults playing sport longer.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks.
Excellent. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. And we'll move into unfinished business delegation follow-up with the Comox Valley Masters Soccer Club Timber Frame Pavilion Partnership Proposal. And okay. Any questions or comments on the recommendation? Councillor Joulakar.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So just a question for clarification to staff. So they've requested for a specific location. Staff recommendation, the recommendation speaks to all of our great design work that's happening. I do recall there was some languaging that they were using around their willingness to proceed if it wasn't in a specific location. And we've done all this great work over the last year and a half, 2 years on playground standards. And I know the community is quite excited about Woodcote moving forward. So just wondering if staff can speak to that at least perceived maybe discrepancy there. Thanks.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Joulakar. Yes, the communication we received from the club to date, including following up on the delegation, is that at this point they're indicating they're only interested in this project if it is in the location that they have identified. What staff are recommending is that we complete the park planning process through the playground design to determine the best location for the pavilion. If that's in the location the club has identified, then this aligns really well and we can proceed. If it doesn't, or it sounds like the club would step away, and then we wouldn't proceed with building the pavilion unless, of course, we return to council with a recommendation to proceed, or another partner steps forward, or but that design at least would be complete so that when the opportunity comes up to put a pavilion in that location, we would be ready for it. But yeah, every indication so far from the club is that unless it's in the location they've identified, they wouldn't proceed. But until we finish the park planning process, we don't know sort of yet if those two things are going to align. Staff do recommend that we proceed. And then if they decide to step away, then we would just, on our playground design, we'd identify where the future location of a pavilion could be. And then either through council or partnership, we could decide to build it at another time.
I do have another question, Mayor, but I see that there's another.
Okay, if he does a subsequent or.
Sure.
Okay, so Councillor Frisch, you get to do the subsequent.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I see. You got a subsequent to that. Anyways, you know, honestly, their attitude makes sense to me. I wonder if you would come back to council if it turns out that the recommendations are separate from that location. Would that be obvious that you'd be coming back and letting us know what the outcome is?
Yes, through the mayor to Councillor Frisch, we would be bringing back the design of Woodcote Playground to council anyways, to provide either an update or if there's a decision point. But we would be informing council of the design of the playground, so we would include it at that time as an update.
Perfect, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch, and back to Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And I know that this project is really highly anticipated for the neighborhood and for Courtney as a whole. And I guess my curiosity, given that this has been in the financial plan and in the strategic plan for a while, you know, we see here the last component of the motion speaks to an allocation of $30,000 through the Partners in Park funding. Do we have an idea of what the potential impact is if we don't have a partner for this component of the park redesign on the Woodcote project budget?
Thank you through the mayor to Councillor Jolicoeur. It wouldn't have any impact on the Woodcote project. We have a separate budget for the Woodcote playground. And we are in the process of reviewing submissions for that project right now. So this is a completely separate piece of work. There's probably a very small amount of sort of design costs that'll just be embedded within the Woodcote playground design project. But this is being treated as a distinct part. So the planner, the park planning work that'll be done as part of the Woodcote playground design will include looking at where this pavilion would go and making a recommendation based on our standards. And then at that point, we would make a decision with the partner if they want to proceed or not. And but it wouldn't affect the overall project budget because it's treated completely separately.
Okay, great, thanks.
So thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur. I see no further questions or comments. So all those in favor? It went real quick. Councillor Hillian moved it and Councillor Frisch second. That sound good? All right, and that passed unanimously. So with that, we'll get into council reports. Councillor McCollum. Councillor Cole Hamilton. Councillor Frisch. Councillor Morin. Councillor Hillian. Councillor Jolicoeur. And really just happy new year to everybody who's made it this far through the meeting. And just really want to give kudos. There was an open house that I attended last Thursday for the AAP projects that are happening at the regional district. And just really wanted to point out, although I didn't get to have any conversations about AAP, it was an opportunity for people to speak to me on other issues with the city. And just want to thank all the people who came out because it was standing room only and great to see that much engagement. And with that, we have our in-camera last. Okay, it's been moved in second. All those in favor? Motion carries and we are adjourned. Thank you.